that should work out. Okay, so anyway, what I changed was, if we look at the code here, what it was this image file URI that we had actually created. That was our image name with the timestamp. So we had set that to some string, some location on the file system, and we passed that into the camera. Well, when the camera came back, our activity was destroyed, the OnCreate method was created again, and that image file URI was destroyed, it was null. So OnActivity result, what was ultimately happening was this variable right here was null, and so I was trying to pass it in and I was getting an exception that I was not handling, and it blew up. So I was like, why is that null when it should have been, oh yeah. So what we had to do, and I kind of explained this before at the beginning of the semester, but let's go over this and see an actual example. I'll put some breakpoints in here just to show you what happens. So we'll run through this real quick and then I'll debug it so you can see what actually happens. But in OnCreate, we have a parameter that's passed into this method, and that's called saved instance state. And so what we do is we check to see if that's null. And if it's not null, that means that the activity has been destroyed and it's being recreated. So by checking for null, we know whether this is a reanimation of the OnCreate or on the activity itself, and OnCreate is being called for a second time. So again, saved instance state not being null means there's some data in there that we want to pull out. So the data that we want to pull out, I'm actually going to set in this override method here called onSavedInstanceState, and that passes in a bundle for me to stick all my little extras in there. And so you could kind of see a pattern here where when we launch intents and we want to stick data in, we can stick data into the intent, and then on our saved instance state, we can stick little pieces of data in that as well. So the little piece of the bundle that we're going to stick the data in is called the out state. So before our activity is destroyed, this onSaved instance state is called. And what I'm doing here in this first line is I am taking that file URI and I'm converting it to a string, because image file URI happens to be a object called URI, or it's an instance of the class URI, and we can't just stick that in there without doing a little bit of work. And so really the only thing I need out of that is the path to the file. So I'm pulling just that little piece of data out of there, sticking it into a string, and then the next line of code here, I'm using that bundle. I'm using our put string method, and then I have a key just called file URI key. This is just a constant that I declared at the top of my class. It's just a string. And I am using the value image file URI string that I just got and sticking that in my out state. And that's all I have to do. So that's how I store information into the bundle when it gets destroyed. And then to recall that information when the activity gets recreated is, again, checking for the state is null. The first time around, saved instance state will be null. The second time around, it will not be, so I execute this if statement. And what we're doing here is the reverse. We're pulling that file or that string out of the saved instance state bundle, converting it to a string, or it is a string, but I'm typecasting it as a string. And then I'm reconverting it back to a file, and then from a file to a URI, because that's how URIs are created. You can create them from a file, so I have to create a new file and then a new URI. So there's a little bit of work there to put it back into the way that it's supposed to go. Hopefully your data is not that complex, but if it is, you just have to do in reverse order what you do to save it. So any kind of custom information that you want saved between activities getting destroyed and being reanimated or recreated, put in this bundle, and that should handle that. So even I tripped up, and you only see this if you set in the developer options. There's a destroy activities. I forget what the one is. We saw it with is a checkbox that every time the activity can be destroyed, it will be destroyed. So if you haven't checked that box, you probably won't see this for a while. But if you rotate the device or you do some other stuff with it, you might run into this. So yeah, I should have talked about that a little bit more, but these are the kind of the things on Android that we have to deal with sometimes. Okay, so I put some breakpoints in here so you can kind of see the execution of code. I deleted the super call there. Let me just clean up the code here because I was trying to get it to work. Okay, so Control D will compile it. I already have the simulator open. That's a working version. And let's see, sometimes it... Okay, so our app is now launching. You don't see anything on the screen because it's still in the OnCreate stage. And it hits this if statement here. Hover over the variable name. It says that it's null, so it'll skip over that if statement and continue along as normal. So that's expected. So I'm going to hit the play button to finish execution of the application. And now we have our interface like normal. Now if I launch the application, or if I launch the camera, what that'll do is that'll call our camera down here, all this intent. I don't have any breakpoints in here, but the activity will also be destroyed. So it's going to have a breakpoint on saved instance state. So I click on that, and once the camera activity comes to the screen, the parent activity in the background gets destroyed. But before it gets destroyed, this is our onSaved instance state being called, and it's giving us again the bundle out state. And so, stepping over this code, it's just going to say, pull the image file URI member. This is a member of our class. And I'm going to hover over this. So this is what this looks like. It's just /storage /emulated/0/picture/bsu camera /image, yada, yada, yada. I don't know if you can see that in the back, but that's what it says. So that's going to go into our bundle, our outstate bundle, by putting the string there, key value pair. And so as long as you have that key, which is a constant in our case, and it's declared at the top of this class, it's just a string in this case. It's a public static final, but it's just a string. So that's our key in order to pull this data back out. So let me hit the play button. Okay, so here's our camera. And it should be doing something, but... Oh, okay, I have a... Yeah, thanks. I thought I hit the play button. Oh, no, it's not on a break. It's... Okay, it should be running. The application's running. Sometimes this debugger is very buggy, so let me relaunch that and I'll go through the steps a lot quicker. And it says refuse connection. It does this every other time. It's not shutting down properly. Very buggy stuff. In between my classes, in between my Android classes, especially when I'm teaching iOS, these tools work great. It's only like during my Android class that they start updating stuff and really mucking with the stability of these things. Let's stop this, rerun this, try again. This will go away in a second. Of course. One more time. Not sure why that's not pulling up. Okay, so this is the first time around, so it's just going to skip over this if statement, hit the play button. Now we have our camera, launch that. It's going to have on this, so I'm going to play through that. And you should see a dancing Jenny Motion logo here. But of course, it doesn't work. if you saw when I first launched it, the app that was up was the working version, so I haven't changed anything. So when in doubt, let's close this out. I think my computer has like stage fright or something like that. It just kind of freezes up and gets all nervous when I'm doing presentations. Yeah, but luckily if you have these problems on your own, you kind of know what to do. Hopefully this works. And make sure everything's stopped, which it is. Hit the debug. Okay, connected, thank you. Hit that play. Let me try and make sure this camera's on. I think that was my problem before, somehow it got turned off. Preview. Yeah, so you should be seeing this little dancing Genymotion icon. Go ahead and cancel that. Launch the camera. Okay, there we go, I saw it. Okay, so I don't know what I did. I just restarted the Genymotion emulator, so this is what you should see. And at any point, let's say right there, we can take a photo, hit done, and now that we hit done, the camera activity goes away and our parent activity comes back onto the screen. And now it's saying, okay, well, it's come back on the screen, but it was destroyed, so I have to recreate it. So now I'm in my onCreate method. And now our saved instance state is not null. It's a whole bunch of stuff here. It's, you know, there's a whole bunch of information in here that you can pull out. But really, all we care about in this case is the file string and getting that out of the bundle via that key that we set. So this key value, again, is just a string. And so by stepping over that, it pulls that out of the bundle and sets it to this, and it's /storage/emulated yada 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 .jpeg. So that looks good. And then we're going to recreate that object from that data and stick it back into our member method, or a member in our class here called image file URI, and then continue along doing the normal stuff that we would do in OnCreate. And so again, in OnCreate, you probably don't want to have any code that it gets executed twice. So if it's a database commit or it's something sending it to the server, that sort of thing, you may not want to put that code in the OnCreate because the OnCreate may get called several times during the lifetime of the main activity or any activity that you have. So play through that. Now finally, that gets recreated, and then we get our OnActivity result. And I'm going to check that the result code is okay, which it is. It's probably -1. Yep. And then result okay constant is still -1. So those are equivalent, obviously. Stepping into that. Now we're using that bitmap factory decode file. And again, we're just using the image file URI that we sent to the camera. We're getting the path. And so we're telling the bitmap factory, create a bitmap for us based on this file location. It does everything for us. Returns a bitmap here. And so if we hover our cursor over the camera, then you can see that it is not null. That's important. And it has a whole bunch of other information that's kind of cryptic. Android.graphics.bitmap. Well, that's pretty much all you really need to know. You can't really view bitmaps in the debugger here. But as long as it has data in there, it looks good to me. And then what we're going to do, if you remember from last class, is we have an image view on that main activity, or I think it's technically in the fragment layout. Image view, we're typecasting that. We do find view by ID. We send it the ID of that image view that we set using the rclass.id. So rclass, again, has all of our IDs in it. So that's our link. We're getting a reference to the image view. Now we have a reference to the image view. We can do something with it. What we're going to do to it in this case is we're going to set the image bitmap that the image view is going to display. So that's all you have to do. Again, get a reference to it, get the image, stick the image into the referenced image view, and let's play through that to see. So right now it's blank, but if I hit the play button, you can see that that image now is the image that I took. And obviously if you were going to use your webcam to take a real photo, then this would have a real photo in it, but this is just the Genymotion data that it's giving you, which is kind of nice if you're just testing this out. You don't want to see my ugly mug on there, but this is the camera feature. So pretty easy once you figure out what was going wrong. And there's a couple of those little tiny things that you'll learn going through your career as an Android developer that are like, why is that null? Why would that ever be null? I mean, the reason that the activity is destroyed is kind of silly in the first place, but again, Android's from like 2002 or something crazy old like that. That it's a carryover from those days. So we just deal with it. Okay. Any questions on that? I will post that code. Apologies for last class. I was struggling through that, but that's what happens. So I'll do more of this where I'll have completed code for you, and the only thing I have to deal with is just emulator problems like I did today, right? So, so hopefully that'll be a lot smoother. Okay, so let's get that off our plate. Let's take a quick look at the syllabus to see where we are. So today is the 4th. And we're going to cover the camera today. Well, we already did that last class, and I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit, but I'm going to do at the same time a little bit of review. So especially project 1, which is due in 10 days, no, 12 days. So not next week, but the week after that. You should have everything in your Android tool kit to develop this out. But let's take a look at project 1, and I did not pull that up prior to class, so sorry about that. Let me pull this up. Okay, so let's talk about project 1, and what I'll do is we'll talk about project 1. I'll show you we'll show you a little bit of web services. We'll talk a little bit about web services, JSON data, that sort of thing. And then hopefully the last, let's say, 15 minutes of class, I'll start actually developing this out for you guys and showing you kind of the step-by-step process. And then maybe I'll develop a little bit over the weekend, come back and show you the code. Now, I'm not going to post the code. You have to develop that out yourself, of course, but I'll show you a little bit of how to pass data back and forth between the views or the activities, and then also how to organize your application or architect your application to make your lives easier for future Android development. But let's just talk about this right now, and then we'll jump back into notes, and then I'll show you the code for this. All right, so what I need you guys to do for project 1 is I need you to architect, and we'll go over the architecture when I go over the coding, and implement, obviously, an app that will display new design pattern to every user. So I got the question, what is a design pattern? Well, design pattern is a particular method of coding or programming that allows you to easily program certain problems. So for instance, there's the singleton class or the factory class. The factory class we just saw with the bitmap factory. So the bitmap factory took a string, namely a file location, and it used that to then generate a bitmap. It went off to that file, it loaded it in, it constructed a bitmap object, and then passed that back. So that's what the factory did. It's kind of like you give it some inputs and it'll spit out an output. And that's the way that we think about metaphorically factories working. The singleton object is a nice object that you can access from anywhere. It's not a global. It has its constraints, its encapsulation, that sort of thing. So it's a really nice way of maybe storing data, common data, or using a particular service. And so when we talk about web services or going out to the internet and pulling down data, we go through a singleton to do that. And essentially, no matter where you are in your application, you funnel all your commands through one point, and that way if something's broken, you know where it's broken, and there's other conveniences that we'll talk about later. But that's what a design pattern is. It's just a method of, it's a pattern to your code. So what I've done is I have a Wikipedia link here, and let's just go ahead and click on that. If you scroll down, it's a good idea if you're not familiar with design patterns, if you haven't taken the software engineering course yet, or I think other courses mentioned. Okay. So if you haven't, just take a read of this Wikipedia article. It's pretty informative, but they have creational patterns, and so this is obviously having to do with creating data or creating objects. And so we have a builder pattern in here. That's what Java uses a lot when you string together different methods. That's called the builder pattern. The factory method is, again, what we saw. They have an abstract factory, which is a little bit different. Object pooling, which is a very powerful optimization pattern that you can use for resources. So for example, in video games where you have maybe, let's say you have thousands of enemies coming at you and you're shooting them and you're killing them and they're going away. Well, they don't actually go away in memory. They're not destroyed as an object. They're put into a pool, and then when enemies are respawned, it pulls from that pool. So you're not allocating and deallocating data all the time. So that's what an object pool is, or one implementation of an object pool. We have a prototype. We have a singleton, which I talked about before. We have structural patterns, adapter, composite, module, etc. Behavioral patterns. And so go through these if any of these sound interesting, or you've heard me talk about them in class, or you've seen it on in a blog post or coming through your software engineering career. Take a look at it. But what I need for you to do in this project is take a handful of these. I won't say how many, but 10 is a good number. You can do them all. That'd be awesome. Take a bunch of those, take the title, so let's say singleton, and then the description. So let's go back to the description. Just this guy, just a sentence or two describing this is the iterator pattern. So you probably, if in your careers as Java programmers, you've probably seen the iterator pattern. It's a very common one in Java. So I want you to, so what the spec says here is display a new design pattern to the user every time he or she opens the app. The user can then get details on that design pattern. So let me draw on the board what I mean. So on this screen, your activity, you launch your app. You can make it more pretty than this. Let's take singleton. And again, I'm not going to define what the interface looks like. Be creative. Creativity gets points. But let's just say there's a button that says details. Okay, and then clicking on those details, let me go backwards over here because clicking on those details, it says the app must display the info on a new design pattern every time the app is open. So every time you open the app or you go back to your home screen and then open the app again, you'll see a new design pattern. So it'll say singleton, and then it'll say factory, and then maybe it says singleton again. It could be random. It can go in order. It's up to you. You might have that in the onStart method. That's a hint for you. So maybe because your onCreate doesn't always get called, but the onStart does because it's coming from basically from sleep and being awakened, and so that's when onStart gets created. So that's just a hint to you where you might want to refresh the interface. And then each design pattern will have a method or a button. In this case, just a hint. I'm not saying that's required. If you want to do a swipe, for example, that might work too. Just anything that makes sense and that I can figure out. If I'm sitting there going, I don't know where your details is, then you probably have a problem with that. Some people have put it up in the menu. There's a menu button in the top right-hand corner. It's 3 vertical dots. That's a little less obvious. Don't put it there. So it'll show a description of that design pattern, which will be shown in a new activity. So this is our new activity. And so what this might look like, singleton, and then maybe that description there. I'm not going to write it out, but you can see some details there. So a singleton, and then the singleton would be wherever singleton was. Ensure a class has only one instance and provide a global point of access to it. So that's what this part of your activity might say. This is just an example. If you want to go on another website and pull different information, you're free to do that. I'm not going to question where you get your data.
So it's kind of like we're doing like a little mini tutorial about these different design patterns.
Yep.
We're not using those design patterns.
I hope you will eventually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's a little description.
Yeah, it was kind of my way of including useful data, not just like lists of bicycles or list of colors. It was actually might be useful. So as you put the data in, hopefully you learn something else. Okay, so that's what that happens when I maybe click on details. You see this screen, and then Android has a back button, and then a home button, and then usually a multitasking. They changed the icons. I forget what they are now off the top of my head. I think it's like a circle, a square, and I don't know, a triangle. I think, or no, it's a left triangle. I think those are the shapes. But anyway, by hitting the back button, we'll return you to this screen, and should have a new design pattern. Okay. So the app must have 2 activities. So I want physically in your code 2 Java classes that inherit from activity, and then obviously use them. Don't just have them in there, but use them.
So that would be like the main and the details?
Yep, you can name them whatever you want, but main activity and details activity would be perfect names for those. Okay. Number 4, each design pattern description will have a checkbox where the user saves it to their favorites. There will not currently be persisted between the app launches, so I don't want you to write this to a database. I don't want you to write this to a file. I don't need you to serialize it to a file. I don't need you to do any of that. If you want to, more work the better. You'll get a better grade on it, but I'm not requiring that at the least. I just want you to be able to have a checkbox down here that says, I don't know, whatever you want to name it, favorite. Okay. And when you check that, you can store that into just an array. And that array is, well, we'll talk about that later. But I check that box, and then I go back here, and I see a different design pattern. Let's say factory. I hit details. It says factory, description. I've never clicked favorites on it, so my favorites checkbox is blank. I go back here, and it says, oh, singleton again. I click on that. This checkbox is now checked because I had previously checked that favorite. So this is a little bit of, this is going to be the crux of the application actually, this little checkbox here, because you have to persist that data in memory. You don't have to persist it between app launches. And I'll show you how to do that, hopefully at the end of class. I might not get to it today, but start thinking about how you would do that. My recommendation is you have an array of all your design patterns with description, and as a member, you have a Boolean in there. So you have title, description, Boolean of favorite, and you'll just pass that along to this guy. We'll show you an effective way of doing that rather than bundling everything inside the intent bundle. And then finally, the app must handle rotation and activities being destroyed. So I showed you how to do that in the camera. So for example, sometimes this doesn't happen, and I have to go and research why this sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't. Let's say I check that checkbox and then I rotate the device. Sometimes it's still checked and other times it's not checked, because what happens is when I rotate it, it does the OnCreate, and these are usually populated because you usually put these in your OnCreate, so these get called again. But setting the checkbox to checked is not called again, and so that sometimes that's blank. Does that make sense? Because the interface is regenerated, and only the user interaction made that checked. So use the code that I'm going to post after class for the camera to take that Boolean value, put it into the bundle, and then on OnCreate, pull that Boolean value back out and set the interface element, but only if saved instance state is not null. And again, I'll show you how to do that. And then finally, submit your Android Studio project via Bitbucket, and we're off. So you also notice that there's no due date on any of my projects, and that's because I had lots of issues with keeping the due date in sync on the project documentation, or the document, and the syllabus. So I like to put it in the syllabus, which is here. So every time I told the students, okay, the syllabus is the master document of due dates, but then I'd have to go back and change it in the project. So I'm not putting any due dates in my projects. I think I've mentioned that before, but I'm reiterating it now. for all of you that are here and on streaming, that the project deadline is in the syllabus. Whatever the syllabus says is the actual due date. Okay? Any questions on that? Just look at the syllabus. I'll always update the syllabus as we move deadlines around. So mostly I extend the deadline. I don't really I don't move things up on you because yeah, that would be mean. And anyway, okay, so February 16th, so that's what we really need to do. So start on that now. I know a lot of you have started that already and have been asking questions, so that's really, really good. Let's go back to project 1. Okay, and then finally, this is not necessarily a requirement, but I really would like to see you have this in here, is mark your git commit with a git tag. And this one's going to be called project_1. And if you go to source tree, and you can see your source tree projects, you can tag any commit that you want at any time and then push that tag up to the remote repository. What a tag is a nice little way of just kind of denoting what this particular commit is. So let me just show you what it is real quick. So let's say this last commit that I posted before class, I posted the notes on web services before class here, and I want to tag that with maybe today's date. I mean, it already has today's date on it, but just, you know, work with me here. What I can do is select that commit in my source tree list here, and let's pretend this was my final commit for my project 1. And you can change your tags later, but so this one's going to be called, just for today's date, Feb 04. Okay, obviously the commit has the date on it, but because I'm not that creative tonight, I'm just gonna do that. And I'm gonna make sure that my checkbox is to push that tag, because otherwise it just stays local on your machine. In Git, you always have to push your changes, push your commits, push your tags. So make sure that's checked, and then just do add. And give it a second. Okay, and so now you can see that it has a little tag, like a little price tag it looks like, called Feb 04. And the reason what you'd want to do this is numerous. Maybe you have an automated build system out there that it tags the build. So every time you commit, it builds your code and then sticks a tag on it. Maybe it's like version 1.1, 1.1.1, 1.1.2, that sort of thing. And you can tag those with it. So when you put that code out in production and you have people that say, hey, I'm running 1.2 and I'm having this bug, what you can quickly do is go back through your commit history and say, maybe this commit right here is the code that my customer is running. I can right-click on that and actually check out that version of code. And if you tag it with, you know, this is version 1.2, you know exactly the version or the commit that the user is running, because you don't always know that this commit is going to make it to version 1.2, right? In the build process, you kind of take whatever build is the latest, and then you kind of freeze the other commits. So there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to do that, but that's a really common one, is to tag it with the version of the software that you're putting out there. So again, maybe let's say this is version 1.2. This is what my client or my customer is using. I check that code out, I run it, I see what the bug is, and then I can say, well, it's already fixed in 1.3, or you know, I can put a patch on it for that version, yada yada yada. So I want you to at least try with project 1 to tag your last commit for project 1. And if it happens not to be project 1, you know, you go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're like, okay, I'm finally done with this project. You go to bed, and as you're lying there with your eyes closed, you realize, oh, I forgot to handle rotation. Go back, fix the code, push another commit up, and then re-tag, take the tag from the second commit, put it on the last commit. It's pretty easy to do. So just this tag button here, and you can say move existing tag if you want to move the tag, or just be creative and just say project 1_1.1. I don't know. I'm not going to be too picky about it, but I do want to see a tag on there to teach you guys something else. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. Let's see where we're at here. Okay. So I'm going to jump into notes for about 20 minutes. It probably won't even take me that long, and then we'll jump into Project 1 coding. So today, this is for tomorrow, next week's class, but I wanted to kind of show it to you first because there's a lot of content in here. Web services. So what are web services? Web services are any kind of service that exists on the web, to be to be blunt about it, but it could be anything from stock market information that you're pulling down. It could be something that you own yourselves that is like maybe a content management system where there's users, there's data for those users, etc. The APIs that exist to pull that data down is called a web service. Announcement, Project 1 is due 16th. We talked about that. I like to kind of, every now and then, I like to kind of throw these slides in for things that have nothing to do with mobile development, but for things that are really, really interesting for all the money that you'll make as a computer scientist or a teacher, right? Because you guys make plenty of money. But I read this book a long time ago, but it's called The Millionaire Next Door, and I'll just read this real quick. It's about this guy goes out and he interviews all of these millionaires to find out who these people are, and the striking thing is they're just kind of everyday people. And so the average net worth of these millionaires is $3.7 million, with only, I say only, an average household income of $131,000. And so you think, well, how does somebody become a millionaire with $131,000? And this book goes into details of how they do that. And it's not just, oh, and by the way, their average houses are only worth $323,000. And I say only because you would think a millionaire would have $1 million house. That's not true. And so you see these houses up on the hill or whatever that are literally millions of dollars. And what this book actually talks about is those people's net worths are actually they're not millionaires based on their net worth. Because they have $1 million house, that's a negative asset, right? So they owe $1 million. And it's just an interesting way of looking at what you think and what you aspire to. All these people that seem to have $1 million, Porsches and Mercedes and BMWs are actually not worth that much. And so this was a very surprising thing to the author. So I want to throw that out there because when you guys go off and make millions of dollars as a teacher or as a computer scientist, you'll have a little bit of information about what actually a millionaire is made of.
Compounding.
Yes.
Compounding interest over time.
Yep, exactly. So save early, save often, save young.
I told my students, listen, a lot of you parents are going to give you trips because more students give you trips to Europe. Okay. Take that $10,000 that they're going to spend on it, put it in an IRA, Roth IRA, let it sit there for 55 years.
Yeah.
You have $2.5 million.
Yeah.
Easy, based just on the average market returns.
Yep.
They're like,
yeah, the more you know, right? Exactly. Well, this is why I'm sharing it with everybody, mostly my students, because these are things I wish that my instructors in college would tell me is, hey, save $10,000, take those $10,000, put it into a savings account. Just that $10,000, as you said, will make $2.5 million after 55 years. If you can't wait that long, you can always put more money into it. So save your money and... I don't know. Yeah, so I don't want to waste too much time on it, but oops, my phone has been blowing up. Take that out of there. So, okay, so web services, the common language for all devices that we mostly use, this isn't the only one that's used, but we prefer it in mobile, and I think most of the web servers are now moving toward this, is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and so it's essentially just a JavaScript object, and when you evaluate it, it is a JavaScript object. And so when a server is giving you a JavaScript object, you don't have to parse it, you don't have to go through any special logic to pull the fields and the values out of the object. It is just a JavaScript object. You can access it, you can grab it as is in JavaScript. Well, we don't use JavaScript, we use Java and Android, and likewise in iOS we use Swift, but for both platforms, we have JSON parsers that do it almost automatically for us. Okay, so we'll get into that in a second. Why JSON? The excuse me. Keeps calling me. So why JSON? Well, the web services that on the server side should be agnostic to the client. So it really shouldn't matter what the client is. It shouldn't matter whether it's a web browser. It shouldn't matter if it's a mobile device or even a watch these days. XML, it used to be the language of choice, but it's kind of clunky and it's hard to parse because there's so many attributes in it. You have to find the end tags, everything like that. Whereas if it's mobile or if it's a browser, it's a JavaScript object, so you can just use it. You don't have to have any special parsing with it. So on a browser, again, you get it for free. On a mobile platform, you have to do a little bit of parsing, but we have libraries that handle it automatically, and it's a lot faster to parse than XML for sure. And so, as I said, JSON can be consumed by JavaScript web apps for free, and then we can easily be parsed by Android or iOS. I say natively, but using the built-in libraries is what I mean natively, not in the Java language. So what does JSON look like if you're not familiar? So at the top we have a curly brace to denote our object, and then the second line is a key. So we talk about key values all the time. This is a key, and that key is a key to a value, and that value happens to be another object. So that another object is denoted by a curly brace. And then inside that object, we have another attribute called title. And this title key is equivalent to the value example glossary. And then we have another key, gloss div, and yada, yada, yada. So you can see all the nested objects that we have. And then finally down, kind of nested way down here, ID equals SGML, sort as SGML. So it's just it's a data structure here that defines I do believe a book structure if you have books, that sort of thing, or whatever. So I'm just going to show you this really quickly. This is a JSON Serializer example. This is how to read in a JSON object and then go through the whole process of parsing it, but we don't really use that. What we use, at least to create the JSON object, is we use a class called JSON Object. And the JSON to JSON has, well, ignore that first kind of line, but this is just an exception wrapper here. But we create a JSON object, I'm just calling it JSON, and we create a new instance of that. And then inside that we use, again, our put method. It's very different from the other one, but it's the same pattern, design pattern. We put a key, JSON underscore ID. Again, this is just a string that we define as a constant somewhere else. And then we're using a member variable called MID, and we're putting that to a string so that we can store it into this object. And I do believe it's a hash underneath, but don't quote me on that. But that's kind of, if you're curious how this works and why we're using key values, it's a Java hash or hash map. And so we use a Java or JSON ID, a title. This is for a crime. If you guys have the book, the Nerdy Ranch book, this is where this comes from. So they do a crime thing. So this is where this is pulled from. But whether this crime is solved, and that's a Boolean, and then the JSON date. So mdate.getTime, it returns a string. We can put that in there. And then finally, we return the JSON object. This is just one example of how to do that. So to create the JSON object in Java, this is how you do it. And then it'll look something like this. It'll be a little bit flatter because obviously this is a nested object, but this one will be flatter in terms of the JSON. Okay, so how do we pull that out? And so in this particular method, we're being passed in a JSON object called JSON, and on the right-hand side here, we have a JSON.getString, and then we're sending it that key, and that's returned as a string. And then I'm using this, or I guess the book is using this UUID. It just creates a unique identifier, or I should say a universally unique identifier. It's a very, very long string of numbers and letters and that sort of thing. But that's what is returned into the member variable MID. And then for our title, JSON.getString, we give it the key to pull out the value and store that in title, and we do that for the rest of the values. as I mentioned, if it's a solved, it's a Boolean. So this is kind of what we're going to do for project 2. And then this is parsing JSON, but you don't need to worry about that. Okay. Let's see. That only took 10 minutes. So let me. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into that. Okay. So let's stop there. Now let's show you. Let me open the home screen so you know where I am. I have this website called Bitstamp. Anybody heard of Bitcoin before? Yeah? Okay. Most of everybody has these days. First time I asked that like a couple of years ago, got blank stares, and then the next semester I asked, got like 1 or 2 heads, and so people are slowly figuring out what this thing is. Okay, so this is a website called Bitstamp. The only reason I bring it up is because it has an API that we can pull the data. What kind of data do they have? Well, this is a Bitcoin exchange, and so it's like the New York Stock Exchange. You can buy and trade Bitcoin, and so you can see what the last bid was and the next asking price. So it looks like the price is going up because now they're asking for $387.24 per Bitcoin. I'll tell you a short little story. I bought my first Bitcoin, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5 years ago at $29. And so now it is up to this price. And so I made a lot of money, but guess who I did it with? Does anybody know with the exchange?
The exchange that went bankrupt?
Yeah, Mt. Gox. So I had that in there. It was, I only put $25 in on it, so it wasn't that much, but yeah, it was, I think when it went under, it was only at, I think I only made like, I turned my $25 into like $129 or something, which is a great return on investment, but it's gone. They're going through this bankruptcy process, and that was my Bitcoin experiment. So wisdom to the wise is yeah. So anyway, your mileage might vary, but that's my little story. But you can see that they have all this data: the asking, the bidding, the times, the price. And so you can grab all this data and you can make a chart with it. You can do a whole bunch of stuff with it. So I already have the API pulled up. And so I do believe, I hope this is still open. I forgot to check it before class. I've used this almost every class here. But we have a API here. So API ticker, we can copy that. Let's create a new window and just paste that in. And so you can see what's being passed back is a JSON object. So our first key here is high. So you can see what the high value was. I think this is in the last 24 hours. $391 in the last 24 hours. The last was $387. The timestamp, you can see it's a timestamp there. It's not a date, but you can convert it into a date. We have a bid. I don't know what VWAP is, or VWAP. I don't know what that is. Volume, how much Bitcoin is on the market. So what you can do is you can manipulate these APIs to pass you back different pieces of data. Hourly ticker. And so these are all GET requests. The GET requests will go into next class, but the GET requests you can paste just into your browser and get responses for these. If we go down, I don't know if, there's a post. So if you want to make transactions, meaning you want to post data to their server, we use a post. And I can't show you that in the web browser, but we have a tool called Postman, which I won't show you today. But if you guys are interested in how do I make post or puts or whatever, that will go over next class, we'll use Postman. So Postman, if you want to install that before next class so we can follow along. You can just do the same thing here. I can paste this in, hit send, and look at a nicely formatted JSON object. So this is a tool. It's actually a Chrome extension for your Chrome web browser. So you can download that. Again, it's called Postman. Again, highly recommend you install that before next class. Okay, question? Anybody? Okay, we're going to jump into project 1 code. Okay, so I'm just going to create this really, really quickly. I'm going to also go through this really, really quickly, the whole thing, because, well, this is the answer to project 1. But I want to show you how to do this, and so you're a little bit more familiar, and then you can go home and figure this out. Oops. Okay, so what I like to do before I start any project or anything at all is I like to draw out my app. So luckily I already have it on the board. I just have 2 activities. I sketch it really, really quickly. For any text, I scribble it out, that sort of thing. I mean, this is essentially what I do before every project to kind of give me an idea of how my app is going to lay out. What I did leave out, however, was the fact that I need some kind of array of objects, namely these design patterns. So a singleton, a factory, an adapter, you know, those types of things. So I need an array. Let's call this array. Get a little more creative when we put in the code. And this array is going to contain all of that data, okay? So what the array will contain is another object. I have a class. And what I need to put in that class as members is, okay, I'm looking at my diagram. This is how I usually work, is I have a title, whatever the title of the design pattern is. You don't have to name a title. You can call it design pattern name if you want. I'm just going to be generic here and call it title. Then I have a description here. Okay, so I'm just going to call that DESC for short. Then my favorite button, well, I don't have, I mean, there's no, you could put the checkbox in there if you want, but what a checkbox really is a Boolean. So actually these are strings. I'm going to do S, S, and then B for Boolean, and I'm going to call that is favorite. I like to, all my Booleans, I like to have a verb in here. So is favorite, has been seen, you know, has, is, you know, that sort of thing. Is I like to denote that because a Boolean is either true or false. So if I say is favorite yes or true, then that kind of makes sense rather than just say favorite true. I don't know. It's a little bit more clear. So that's how I work. And so that'll take care of all my data that I have in here. So I'm going to wrap this in a class. And of course, I'll have getters and setters for those, no problem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have, let's call this class a DP for design pattern or DPAT. I'll type it out in code, of course, but I don't want to write it. So each one of these arrays will have an instance of a DPAT or design pattern class. Okay, and then so the instances will have different values in here, of course. And this is the way that I'm going to store all my data. And then what I'm going to do is you can do it a number of ways. What you need to do in the onStart, if you want, you can do it in a different way if you can think of it, is I'm going to take a random number between 0 and the length of the array. So in this case, it's 5. So between 0 and 5, random number, let's say 2. I'm going to use that 2. Sorry if you can't see that in the back. It's just it's a 2. The 2 to index this object, pull this object out, pass it to this activity, and use these values in this object that gets passed or gets pulled out of here into there. And then when I click on details, what I want to do is in my intent, I actually want to pass in that index of 2. I don't want to pass this object because then I have to implement the serializable interface, and I'm just lazy. I'd rather pass a 2 than try to serialize that class, which is probably not hard, but it's more work. I mean, I just pass a 2 in my intent. So let's, in my intent bundle, we'll say. Intent bundle. Okay, so in my intent bundle, I'm going to pass the integer 2. I'm going to give it a key. And then what this guy is going to do, this activity, when he's created, is this activity is going to go back to the same array. And because I have that 2, I can use that as an index here, pull that object out, and then populate this array. So, or populate this interface. Title, description, favorite is favorite. Title, description is favorite. Okay, so that's kind of the way I work. Is I look at my diagrams that I drew, and that's why I had you draw diagrams. And is to kind of, when you start developing out, go, okay, what data do I need? Well, I need data here. This is just a button. I don't need anything for that. This is data, this is data, this is data. I need to store that somewhere, but this data is the same as this data, so it's going to share this object. And instead of passing this object back and forth, something that you learn in Android is just to pass the index of the array and then keep this array. And what we're going to do is a singleton so that we can access it from anywhere. All right, so let's do that. Now that we know where we're going. So right now I just have my main activity. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, I'm not going to mess too much with the interface. I'm going to double click on this, give it an ID, just call this design pattern title. Okay, and then I'm going to drag in a button. And I'm going to call this details. And for the button name, I'm going to call it details button. Okay, and that sets up our first interface. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about the other stuff. I want to set up my interface for the second activity. So the way that I'm going to do that is right-click on my package name for project 1, going to New, scroll down to Activity, and I'm going to just create a blank activity because I don't think anything else here. I mean, it's a simple activity, so I'm just going to do there. It's going to ask for a name. It's going to give it main too. I'm going to call mine details activity. So the activity name should be capitalized, and then it should fill in everything else for you automatically. It is not my launcher activity, meaning it's not the activity that's going to get launched. For sake of simplicity, I'm just not going to use a fragment for here, but normally you would. Okay, so now I have this interface, and so what I can do is I can go back to my, let's see, content main. Oh, this, I don't know why this always turns off. Okay, so my content main, well, I was going to copy and paste it in there, but because again, I'm lazy, but I'm just going to recreate this. So plain, let's see, text view. Here, this is going to be called design pattern title. Yeah, usually I put the type after that, but I'm just going to hurry through this really quickly. We don't need a button there, so looking back at my interface to give me a guide, I have a description, so I have another text view. For this particular one, yeah, let's just do a main text view again. There's somewhere around there. And then a checkbox, which is here, so I'm going to drag that in there. Okay, then I'm going to give all these title or descriptions, so that's fine. ID, so this one is called a description text view. Yes, please change that. And then a checkbox. Let's just call it checkbox. And let's change the title to is favorite. Okay, so let's save that, go into our main activity. We're going to create these as member variables. So I have my button, and we're going to call that details button. Okay, just declare it there. We have a title, so that's a text view. And that one's called just title text view. Okay, I'm just going to copy those here. You can kind of see how I work. Copy those. Set my onClick listeners for those. Okay, wait a second there. So we have a click listener for the details button. For the, actually, we need to get the reference to it first. Find view by ID, r.id, details button. Okay, and then for this one, what I was going to do, we don't have a click listener for it, but we need still to get the reference to it. Text view, find view by ID, and that one's going to be RID dot. I think I called it design patterns title. Thank you. And then for this one, what I'm going to do is just hard code this for now. set text. Okay, so then when we click this button, we have an intent, so let's create that intent. Intent, let's call it details intent. Some people call it I. Don't do that because it's ugly. New intent. Give it the context, so usually the class that's calling it, main activity.this, and then the class that we're going to create, so in our case, details activity. And then we have to give it the class description so it can create that activity for us, so .class. It's asking me for the app, so there we go. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do start activity. We don't want a result back from it necessarily, so let's just go ahead and do this and pass it the intent. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to pass it this index. Okay, so I don't have an index yet, but let's just hard code that in. I'm going to create an int, and I'm going to call it design pattern int, and I'm going to set that to, let's say 0. And we'll see how much time we have until. Okay, make sure my variables are correct there. Oh, I need to pass it into the bundle, of course. So details intent, put extra, and I'm going to say DP index. Doesn't really matter what you call it because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight it, right click on it, go to refactor, extract as a constant. Give it a name, that's fine, you can type it in there, hit enter, it'll declare it as a constant, put it up at the top. So now what I can do is copy that and make sure it's public, so public here, and then in my details activity, what's being passed in the saved instance state, whoa, no, sorry, not the saved instance state. What I need to do is get the extras. Let's see, get extras. Oh, get the intent first. Get the intent for the intent that called us, and then get extras. And then get. And then here's where I use the key, and because I used it as a public static in my main activity, I can access it here by calling main activity.dpIndex, and that's going to return, if you remember, an int. So I'm going to create another int, and let's just call it design pattern index, and typecast that as an int, and hopefully all those things go away. Okay, so again, I'm passing in that 0, just the object index in this case, and then I'm pulling that out, and we got 6 minutes. So let me create the final class for today, and then I'll let you go. So I need a class to wrap this array in, but I need it to be accessible from both of these classes. Or both of these activities, excuse me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a plain old Java class. I'm going to call it, this is a list of design patterns, so I'm going to call it design patterns repository. It's going to be a place that all the design patterns are stored. You can call it whatever you want. I've seen people call it different names. And inside here, what we're going to do is you could make this private, and then you can have a getter for it. I'm just going to make it public for sake of speed. Public static, and this is going to be an array list of, actually I'm going to need to do design, an object called design pattern, I forgot about that, which is going to be this guy right here. So I'm going to create another Java class called design pattern. And in here, I'm just going to do, if I look at here, string boolean, This is why I create these graphs, because I can't remember everything. Well, I can, but it takes me a lot longer. So title, string description, string or boolean is favorite. And then what I can do is I can, actually I don't need to even highlight that, is I can hit the Command N button or the Control N button, go down to getters and setters in my generator window that pops up here. So again, Command N or Control N. And it's going to ask me what getters and setters do you want to create. Just shift highlight those, hit enter, and your getters and setters are completed for that. So very, very nice. And then back in my repository I have this class created, and I'm going to call this design patterns array list. So again, use your tools. I'm going to set this to a new instance of array list, and I don't know if I ever have to do this thing. Pass that in there like that. Okay, so again, you'd probably do a getter and setter on this. Well, let's just do that because we can explicitly name that. So by default, it's private. Control N. We could just do a getter on that. We don't want anybody to write to it necessarily. There's our getter, which will pass back that. Okay, and then eventually we would probably have a constructor for this that passes puts in the data, creates these objects, and then populates the array. I'll do that over the weekend for you guys, so you don't have to see me just creating instances of this. But what you'd probably do, you wouldn't want to do it here, but you'd say design pattern, new pattern equals new design pattern constructor, and then since we have all those getters and setters on it, you can do set title, and then new title here. And I'm just going to show you the gist of it so you can start working on this on the weekend because we still have time left. So design pattern array list dot what is the I'm drawing a blank. What's the push? Or yeah. How do I push an array? Push an object to a array list? Add, right? No, it's staring me in the face. Okay. Sorry. Drawing a blank. There we go. Okay, so add. I was thinking. I don't know what I was thinking. Insert or something. Okay, so let's set this to something a little bit more creative. Singleton. Okay, so this is one way to do it. You can write it to a file and then read it from the file. You can get this from a web service. You can get this data from anywhere. For the purpose of this project, hard code like 5, 10, 20, whatever you want to do. And then obviously we would have like a set description on this and okay, something like that. Okay, so now this array list has two, and you wouldn't want to put this code here because every time you call get, it repopulates the array. So if you call it 4 times, or I'm sorry, if you call it 2 times, you'll have 4 objects in there because it'll call it the first time it'll do 2. You call it again, it'll add 2 more of the same. So don't put it here. But I'll finish this up over the weekend. I'll put some real values in here for you. But back in your main activity class, now that we have references to this, instead of getting the text here, what we can do is we can get a design pattern. And we can say design pattern repository, design pattern get. And so this will get me the array list, and then I can do a get on that and pass in an index. Well, you want to get the length of it before, but I'm just going to do 0 because I know. So I like to hard code a lot of things initially and then go back and clean it up. But I want to make sure everything's working before I concentrate on how I'm going to get different values. So I probably create a random number from a random number generator. But I know I've already populated it with one object, so I'm just going to get that first index of here, store it into the current design pattern, set the design pattern here to title. And that should be good. Again, you probably want to do this in the onStart, but it doesn't matter because we're always getting the same object. Let's run this really quickly. Oh, is this in my, no, main activity? Oh, this is, I forgot to actually put the value in there, so design pattern int. Yeah, key value, that's what we needed. Hit enter. Actually, before I do that, okay, so I have the design pattern index here. So this is in my details activity. What I can do here is do the same thing. So design pattern repository dot get this, and then get. In this case, it's not 0. I'm going to use the one that's actually passed into me, which in this case is 0, but I'm going to make this a little bit more dynamic. So I'm getting that object, and it knows it's going to be passed back as a design pattern. So I'm going to say current design pattern equals yada yada yada, and then I would go ahead and populate my index with this object that's pulled out of this array in this field that has been passed in with this, my intent bundle. Okay, so that's probably about 70% of project 1. We'll hopefully finish it up on Tuesday. Obviously, you guys aren't that fast to code it. I've done this a couple hundred times, so you know, of course, it doesn't always work, and I always forget stuff. But that's the initial part. Yeah, feel free to take photos.